Cassandra Heath. I am the University Registrar at Biola University in La Mirada, California. I've been in higher ed for about 17 years now. I started in the admissions area, working with transfer admissions students, transfer incoming students, and then moved to the registrar's office about 10 and a half years ago.
And fun fact, Cassandra and I just met 48 hours ago at the annual meeting. It's a really cool session that we just wanted to talk about because it really left an impression on me. I don't know if it did for you, but we want students, but are we ready for students? Are we truly student ready for them? And I think that those are questions like we should be asking ourselves that we don't ask ourselves enough, right? And I don't know, maybe you think it's like the fast-paced environment that we live in. I don't know.
I think it's the fast-paced environment we live in, as well as we have so many, especially in the registrar's office, we have so many federal things that we're complying with. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I think it's easy to ignore what students need and how do we serve students well.
Yeah. And then enrollment management too, right? We're trying to make numbers.
Yes.
We're trying to get applications and yield and stuff. And we don't truly always stop to ask these questions. But I think it was an eye-opening experience, this workshop we went to, which kudos to ACRO for offering this workshop for us on being student ready. And then the policies behind, being student ready. So I'm curious to know your afterthoughts of this session.
Yeah. So as I've reflected, one of the things in my heart as a registrar, as well as a former admissions person, is that we want to take care of students. There are federal regulations we have to comply with. There are rules, policies in each university that we have to comply with, and there's reasons for that. Mm-hmm. But more often than not, I don't think we stop and think about what do those policies, how do they impact students? How do they impact especially first generation students? I was a first gen student myself, and I had no idea about this college structure. So coming into all of these policies, you can take this course when, you need to take this many courses to receive financial aid. It's confusing. And then when policies aren't written well, mm-hmm. Or written with jargon that students may or may not be aware of, it can confuse students and cause them to become anxious. Mm-hmm. And so I think for me, it was an important moment to stop and start looking at how we develop policy and how we implement policy to make sure that we're taking care of the students who choose to come to our institutions.
Mm-hmm. For the listeners that were not in that session, we were in this really cool policy making, policy revisiting session. And it was truly eye-opening because they gave examples of real life policies that exist even at our own institutions right now. But we were challenged to look at it from different perspectives. And I think that was the most eye-opening part, right? We got to be students in that one. So we felt as we were reading through the policies, how the policy was aimed at benefiting the institution and their goals, which were fiscal, right, financially driven goals, but very disconnected from the reality of students, right? And I'm trying to remember what policy it was. Was it a Berzar one?
Yes, yeah. So it was about paying before you enroll.
Right. And then being dropped.
Yep. And then being dropped.
For non-payment.
And, a lot of schools have that policy. We have a policy that's not quite as harsh as that one. But I was starting to think about it. When we put ourselves in the roles of students, I was thinking about the students that end up sitting in my office when they're dropped. And, usually they're dropped for a multitude of reasons. And, payment is one of those. And I think it was eye-opening to me, the feelings, because I don't know that I've ever put myself in the emotions that students have.
Yeah. And transactionally, we are an operation, right? So transactionally, it makes sense, like pay or get dropped. Yes. But then we dove a little bit deeper at how the student must feel. And I know you worked in transfer. So in our session, prior to our session, we had this whole transfer conversation, right? With Diana, who will also be joining later. But transfer students, they have so many barriers and obstacles that you just give them one little challenge and they will not come back. Like they will use that as an excuse to say, you know what, I'm going to give up in this whole system. Like, I don't understand it. It's overwhelming. I'm not going to come. And so we know that because we practice in the world of transfer. But I think this was like an opportunity to say, okay, I know that, but what am I doing to help my institution understand that these policies that we have or are implemented are not student centered?
Yeah. It's interesting with transfer students because they're coming from one college that has one set of how you do things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so many times we take for granted the fact that, oh, they already know the system, they've been in college before, they'll easily adapt into our system and our policies. That's not always the case.
Right.
Sometimes they're used to what they knew and it's so drastically different. Sometimes it's different enough and they're stressed about the transition.
Mm-hmm.
They have anxiety about stepping into a new institution. And I think we, as policy creators and those who revise policy, I think we need to think about that when we set policy. Of how do we set these policies so to give students grace in times that they need grace as they're transitioning, but also what does it look like to be student centric and really care for these students
Right.
as they step into this new world? Because yes, once they get into the rhythm, they will probably be fine. But I don't think we take enough time to think about it. We just assume that won't be buried for them. They've done this before. They've enrolled before at another institution. It's all the same, but it's truly not all the same.
And we all do it differently. So while your institution might not drop students until, I don't know, 2 weeks before census day, my institution might drop them 2 weeks before the first day of class, right? And so then there's a timeliness to it. Because I think one of the perspectives that we shared was when students get dropped, will professors still accept them or will they be behind? And will they be comfortable coming into a class late? And then, of course, will it be successful? That's the other question.
Yeah. Well, and I think about schools too, as budgets have tightened, less course offerings are coming about, and so we're thinking, so waitlists, like at our institution, waitlists are much higher than they've ever been. And so I think about these students who may register for a class on time, coming into the system for the first time, and then they get dropped. And then they have to go into the wait list. They're not sure they can get their class. They're probably on a tight timeline because, as we know, transfers want to graduate as quickly as possible because they probably already spent a little bit more time than they originally thought to get to that 4-year degree completion. And so entering the system and your first exposure with your faculty member is talking to them about getting into the class when the wait list is
full. It's freaking wild.
Yeah.
It's so wild. And I think that the particular policy, you know what? I've read that policy before. I know that I've worked somewhere where that policy exists because it felt way too common, like for me. But as I was reading it from the student perspective, and I know we shared this at our table, was you tell the student you're going to be dropped for non-payment. You're going to drop at this time, right? You need to ensure that your bill is looked at if you have questions, right? There's a financial statement that they had to fill out, and everything was like, it's your responsibility to do it. And nowhere, not once in that policy did they say it's our job to inform you. Or you know what? We live in the technology, right? There are no QR codes or links that say your financial statement is here, your FAFSA is here, your contact is here. And I think that those are the small changes that while you can't, it's very, very situational, right? So while you can't disclose everybody's individualized financial stuff or situation in a policy, could we be more proactive at handing them the information?
Yeah. And that's one of the things I was thinking in like looking at our own institution, because this has been a topic of conversation. I had a meeting with our faculty right before I left about this very thing of, okay, is this in the student's best interest? Is this in faculty's best interests? And we talked about all those various stakeholders as we kind of examine the policy. And that's been something I've been thinking about a lot is what are we doing to inform them? And how do we display that in the policy? How do we display what the school's responsibility is? Because again, they're entering into the system. If they don't know where to find their bill, they probably don't. They probably have not interacted with your systems unless you happen to go from a school that's on the same type of system, which we know is not always the most common. It just is important, I think, that we look at policy as a way to inform too. We give students, we all know as registrars and those who work in admissions, students are not going to read the catalog all the time.
No.
And
I mean, do we even read the catalog? I mean, faculty read the catalog? I don't know.
I was going to say,
I want to meet somebody that has read the catalog.
right?
If you are listening to this and you have read your entire catalog, please send me an email. I will give you a personalized shout out on this podcast.
Right. And, and I think about, I mean, as registrar, I have read the catalog, but we just went through a reorganization of our catalog to pull out policies and actually have like policy links, because one of the things I was finding, students couldn't find our policies.
Yeah.
And so we would talk about something, and I shared this when we met, but one of my jobs is to oversee appeals. And so when students are not happy with the policy, guess who they talk to and guess who they appeal to? That would be me at my institution. And what I was finding is that students couldn't find our policies. So not even it was they weren't aware, it's just they couldn't find them in the mess of our catalog. And so we wanted to make it more student-centric, so we created kind of this like custom links to it. And I think that we as an institution we as higher ed institutions need to think about this a little bit more of how do we make sure students are aware of our policies,
right,
and what our responsibility is in this.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point. There was, we also had a discussion about making professional determinations, right? And how there's no guidance. So I had never thought about this before, but now I wonder how many inconsistencies there are when we leave that opportunity so open to interpretation, and how many people are we discriminating against or being inequitable to, because we don't have a set rubric that says you're going to appeal, and you know more about this more than I do, but you're going to appeal, and this is what we're looking for, and this is how we're going to come up with a determination. I've never seen a rubric like that. So now I'm wondering, like, whenever, and I've had to appeal in my life before. I had to appeal my financial aid at one point in my undergrad career. And I was first gen, didn't know what it was, what it means. Like, I don't even know how I did it or what it was for, but it never crossed my mind. Like, how did they make up, with this determination?
Yeah, that's a question I often ask myself as I'm making these decisions. How do I ensure equitability across the board? That every situation is nuanced. And so you cannot always make the same decision for every situation, because as we know, students are not numbers on a page. They're real life people that are experiencing this. And so you want to review every situation like that. However, I careful documentation of how I make every decision to ensure that way I can look back when I'm making a similar decision to it. What did I look at? Yeah. Why did I make this decision? Is there something else that's nuanced so that my decisions stay consistent? And that way students can expect consistency of, okay, we know, not one of those situations where, oh, my friend got this approved, so I got this approved. Right. And it was like, oh, you caught whoever is making the appeal decision on the right day or the right day.
I know. Can you imagine? Dependent on emotion? Oh, my goodness.
It would be, it's exhausting. And I think the common misconception when it comes to appeals sometimes is that, we don't want the best for students, whereas I would say that's the opposite. That's the opposite of why I take the role. I want the best for students. I want things to work in their favor. And when I say no, it has more to do with I need to uphold the standards of the institution, right, so your degree means something.
Yes.
But trying to communicate that in those moments.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Is the hardest. And I think that's where, for me, this workshop was so, it confirmed something I had already felt, that we really need to look at our policies, not only at my institution, but across higher ed, to make sure that we are creating policies that, one, do align with federal regulations, because we all want to stay open and receive federal financial aid.
We all want to be employed.
Yes. But two, that serve students and are clear and that are kind. I would go, I'm going to quote Brene Brown. She's one of my favorites. But she says often, clear is kind. And I think sometimes we have nuanced our policies so much that they're not clear. Yeah. And therefore not kind.
Well, and we can't portray to be professionals that are for accessibility, right, and equitability in the front end, in the recruitment admissions registrar part, and then look into the policy and in the back end be so constrained and not student-centered. Like, that's so contradictory, right? Yes. And I don't even know if, we take the time to just think this out. Another thing we mentioned too is that policies involve other departments and divisions. So maybe it's our responsibility, or needs to be our responsibility, to be advocates for the students, stronger advocates for students, and ensure that everything that we can have a say so in is student centered.
Yeah. And I'd be curious, how other institutions create policy. I know one of the things that I brought about at my institution started before I got there, but then we've really kind of tried to grow it, is other voices in the policy process. So we have a policy advisory group. I have a student.
That's
on
wonderful.
That,
wow, that's cool.
Because I'm like, one of the things that's important to me is I want to make sure students have a voice in it. And more often than not, there's not a lot for the students there. They're like, okay, I get that. But I always make sure, like in those meetings, to bring the student voice forward, because I'm like, I want to understand how students are going to see this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think more institutions, this is the first institution I've ever been at that we've done something like that. And it's something that I'm thankful for. And I hope, if I'm not planning to work in an institution, but, I hope more institutions do that and look at across campus, how does this policy affect, get stakeholders in the room to talk about this? Because as we saw in that session, we all role played as different, faculty, the bursar's office, administration,
adult learners, which is a whole other population. Yeah.
So I think it's important to look at how does policy impact every stakeholder, because for the bursar's office, that policy was important.
Mm-hmm.
They have a bottom line and a goal they need to meet, and you don't want to take that importance out of it,
right?
But you also want to make sure that you're honoring students in the middle of that.
Absolutely. That is so wonderful. I am so thankful that I met you, Cassandra. Yeah. We had some really good conversation, and I'm so glad that you came on Transfer Tea. Thank you for stopping by.
Thank you.